Don't touch that dial. You're tuned in to the Dread Podcast Network.
Welcome to Development Hell. For every horror movie that hits V.O.D, countless others end up D.O.A. Development Hell is the podcast dedicated to unearthing these cursed horror productions. We're going to find out what went wrong, and then decide if these titles still stand a shot at the green light. I am your host, Josh Korngut. I am the managing editor of Dread Central. I am also a filmmaker in Toronto, Canada. This podcast is a proud member of the Dread Podcast Network. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to a brand new episode of Development Hell. Today, we are talking about the HBO Max series that never was, Overlook. So this was going to be an extension of the Shining universe by Stephen King, and this was going to be happening back in about 2020, and it never happened. And today we're going to discover why. Today we are welcoming back a returning guest judge. We have with us Jinx. Jinx, how's it going?
Hey, Josh, I'm just sitting down here in my dungeon, having a great old time. Finally acclimated. Guess I'm an institutionalized man now, and just grinning ear to ear, playing around here in the dark. So just appreciate you putting me up.
You know, you are always such a team player, and I'm just so excited that, you know, you're just making it work. That's so Jinx of you, and I appreciate it as always. And I like what you did with the carpet. It's got a distinct pattern. It's like, you know, I feel like this whole room has a real mood to it now. So
that's urine, Josh.
It does. It smells like that and worse, but that's okay. It's what's to be expected. The different topics that we're going to be going through today are, of course, going to include the Overlook series that didn't happen, but we're going to take a look at the entire extended Shining universe. So that's going to include the book, the film, the sequel book, Dr. Sleep, the sequel film, Dr. Sleep, and then we're going to wrap it up with the unmade Overlook series. So something that we've talked about, well, I've talked about before, I don't know, have you and I ever dug into Stephen King before, Jinx?
If we did, I've forgotten about it in all the trauma of being held.
Well, yeah, you've been through a lot. So that's to be expected.
Hey, but I'm happy now. So
you seem it. You seem it. It's a great attitude.
Or am I? Is it sarcasm or is it Stockholm? That's the question.
I think it's halfway between the two, but we're going to get you to full Stockholm at some point.
All right.
That's been my long-term con. I'm a big Stephen King head. I think people that listen to this podcast already know that. I'll cover him at any opportunity that I can, and luckily there's plenty of it in the world of Development Hell. And I'm just wondering, Jinx, quickly, what are our relationships, or more specifically, your relationship with Stephen King?
Stephen King. So Stephen King, to me, you know, I grew up in the 80s when Stephen King was sort of experiencing his first sort of mega boom of popularity. And so Stephen King just kind of always was, you know, and it felt like he had always been there. And so I grew up watching, bits and pieces of his movies, you know, however much I could stand when I was a kid, I would listen to other people talk about them. Mainly my experience growing up initially with Stephen King was hearing other people talk about, you know, the films and the books. And I just remember being intrigued, but also thinking that, okay, that's not for me. Like, I can't do that. You know, it sounds too scary, too weird, too this, too that. And eventually, as I started growing up, you know, and I've talked about this, I think even on this podcast before, my sort of a relationship with horror movies, especially when I was a child, and I was ever so slowly sort of brought into the fold as a fan. But with King, I want to believe that my first honest to goodness experience with watching something of his. And I'm glad that it was pure King as opposed to just an adaptation of one of his works. But I spent the night at a friend's house and he broke out a VHS copy of Maximum Overdrive,
Oh my God.
which King directed. And you know what? I got to tell you, I loved that movie so
Yeah, it's
much.
good.
So much. And but yeah, beyond that, when I first started getting into reading his work, I started with the short stories. There was like Night Shift,
Mhm.
Nightmares and Dreamscapes was another one that when I was a kid I sort of I think I snagged a hardcover of it, or rather, a family member snagged a hardcover of it from like a book sale and passed it along to me. And I was like, "Yeah, I'll check this out." And I remember reading stuff like The Night Flyer and Popsy, and all those great stories in there. But yeah, it was sort of baby stepping my way towards cracking open the first big novel that I read of his, which is still to this day my favorite of his works, and that is The Shining.
Whoa.
Yeah, The Shining is my favorite King novel. It's the
Oh.
first King novel that I read, and I absolutely adore it. And I adore the franchise. I adore pretty much anything attached to that tale. There's something about it that I find endlessly fascinating. And yeah, no, so I love it. And then after that, I think the first King movie I ever saw on the big screen was Thinner, which is a
Mm.
Bachman book turned into a movie, and I love that. I love the book, but yeah, no,
Mhm.
I adore King. I'm glad that because I don't know if people really, yeah, and maybe they would disagree with me, but it feels like there for a while that King was mega popular going all the way through into the late 90s. And then there was kind of a lull, like not with
Mhm.
his work, not with his output, certainly not with the quality of the stuff that he was putting out, but it just seemed in terms of like the mainstream consciousness that he receded a bit. And
Mhm.
then he came back in a big way recently, and I'm so glad that he's getting kind of this second run of
Mhm.
recognition.
Yeah, I like to think of it as we kind of go through peaks and valleys of Stephen King popularity in the zeitgeist. And I think
Yeah.
we are actually right now, I think maybe we're in a bit of a valley, having seen like a huge peak with the two It films and even the Pet Cemetery reboot. But in terms of, for me, I think the first Stephen King book I ever read proper, it's probably going to age me, was The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon. I read that in
Nice.
middle school, and it really left an impact on me because I think it kind of works as perfect YA horror in a way that is never talking down to its audience and respects it. Really amazing book, but also the short stories were an entry point for me. My two favorite that I talk about on this podcast at any chance that I get are The Jaunt, which is terrifying, and Mrs. Todd's Shortcut. They're both in Skeleton Crew, and they're both just magical. Funny that you say the first Stephen King novel you ever read was The Shining, because that's the most recent one that I ever actually um, read. I think it was around Halloween that I, for the first time ever, read The Shining, and it's incredible. It's terrifying, really scary book, and people are always comparing it to the film because it's famously, very different, or he famously really didn't like the Kubrick adaptation because it sort of went in a different direction. But reading it, I didn't necessarily feel that way myself. I felt like they definitely had a bit of a shared spirit, but we'll get
That's
into that
interesting.
soon.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I will say when it comes to Tom Gordon, I just want to throw this out there as a possible future episode of your show.
Oh,
I remember back in the early aughts, not long after that book came out, that for the longest time, um, there was bandied about the idea of a Tom Gordon film adaptation starring Dakota Fanning.
yes. Was this
So
the George Romero version?
I don't know if it was Romero, but man, could you imagine?
Really amazing. Are you familiar with the most recent director to get attached to The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon? Because this was about, I think, within the year.
No, no, no.
I think it's Lynn Ramsey from, yeah,
Oh,
we need to talk
wow.
about Kevin fame. So that should be very, very interesting.
And
If
also
I
the
uh
Joaquin Phoenix film that was recent, right?
Oh, yes.
Which was, I always forget the damn title of it because it's a
I forget.
mouthful,
It's like a sentence title, like "You are not alone" or "We're
but
gonna
it's
get you" or
but
something.
it's
Yeah.
absolutely brilliant. I would love to see her tackle
Hmm.
something from King's King's work.
Yes. I Now don't take this as fact, but I think at one point Romero was attached to produce or to direct, and then after his passing, his wife kept on as a producer, and I believe she may still be producing the project to this day. I believe her name might be Chris or something like that. Does that sound familiar to you? But the estate, I believe, is still involved.
Wow, okay. That's pretty great. I would hope that George then is, whatever the resulting film is, I hope his name is left on as a producer for developing it in the first place.
I hope so too. It'd be really cool to see it, especially with Lynn Ramsey and Stephen King. What a trifecta.
You Were Never Really Here is the name of the Lynn
That's it.
Ramsey Joaquin Phoenix movie, by the way,
It's
which is
an impossible title
amazing.
to remember. Sorry.
Yeah, it's just it's too unwieldy.
But I like it. Jinx, would you be into a bit of a seminar, one would say, on the original novel by Stephen King?
Yeah, it hit me.
Well, The Shining is a book that came out in 1977 by our favorite, Mr. Stephen King, and it was his third sort of major published novel and his first hardback bestseller. So it was a huge success for Stephen King and would eventually be made into a film. The stories and the character and the stories are influenced by his own experiences, including the time Mr. King spent a visit at the Stanley Hotel in 1974, and it also takes on the themes of his own struggles with alcoholism. So this was then turned into a 1980 film, and the book would eventually get a sequel in 2013 by the name of Doctor Sleep, which also got a film. I'm wondering, Jinx, in your own words, what would you say The Shining, the book, is about?
Oh hell. Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry.
sprung this on me,
I
Josh.
had to. I had to do it.
Well done. Okay, so I would say The Shining concerns a man named Jack Torrance and his wife Wendy, their son Danny, who hole up in the Grand Overlook Hotel during its off season. Jack is a writer, and he's been given the job to perform duties as a caretaker for the Overlook while it's basically sits empty and weathers out all of the horrific winter snows and whatnot until the hotel goes back into season. And during their time there, very strange events occur, which make one believe that the hotel is likely haunted.
Uh-oh.
Couple this with the fact that Jack's son Danny appears to have some sort of, would you call it clairvoyance?
Mhm.
Would you call it an extrasensory perception of the supernatural? Would you call it The Shining, like Dick Halloran does in the story for some reason?
I think I would.
Okay, we'll call it The Shining then.
Mhm.
But yeah, ultimately, Jack's alcoholism, coupled with the fact that he is manipulated by the spirits that run the Overlook, leads to a pretty intense confrontation with him and his family, and Dick Halloran, who was I believe, a chef, right?
I think so. In the
For the
film,
hotel.
for sure.
Yes, and it occurs to me I haven't, even though it's my favorite King novel, I haven't read it in long enough that I've actually forgotten some of the
Mhm.
finer details. But yes, poor Mr. Halloran shows up to save Wendy and Danny, and unlike in the feature film, he is, would you say, somewhat successful
Yes.
in
Yes, I
this,
believe
but
so.
everyone, by the time we reach the ending, Jack goes up with the hotel in a pretty spectacular fashion, while Wendy, Danny, and Halloran make it to safety. And
Mhm.
the wonderful, cold, hard sort of ending of that novel is that, yeah, you have all these survivors left behind. You have Wendy, you have Danny, you have Halloran, and yet they're all left with pretty significant scars,
Mhm.
and you know that they're never quite going to be the same.
Well, I was gonna say, and they explore that in quite a scary way in Doctor Sleep.
Yeah, 100%. Yes, it's all about like, Danny's trauma and how he carries that with him throughout his
Yeah,
life.
not just trauma, but like the ghosts are with him still.
Yes, the very literal demons
Yeah,
in his
kind of
case.
in like the sort of in the style of Insidious, like the film,
Yes,
where like
they
they're latched to him, and luckily he has successful tactics of compartmentalizing them, but they're there.
yeah, I love that idea too. But
So scary.
but I also love, I mentioned a moment ago that Jack goes up with the Overlook. What I think is kind of fascinating, and I am certainly far from the first to point this out, but what I think is fascinating between there are many differences in approach between the book and the film, but the book ends with Jack discovering that in his mania and chasing after his family, he has forgotten to dump the boiler underneath the Overlook. And so it
Hmm,
basically throttles up and it explodes and it takes the entire hotel and Jack,
that's
along with
right.
it.
I forgot that it was like an explosion or a fire in the book.
Whereas in the film, Jack basically stumbles around wildly in the dark and the freezing cold and the snow, and he winds up freezing to death. And I love that approach. I love how that sort of speaks to each artist's approach to the specific story. Whereas, in King's version, it ends in fire, and in Kubrick's version, it ends in ice. And that
Cool.
totally explains their own approaches to that particular story in such a marvelous way, I think.
Yeah, definitely wonderful. And you got to know that Kubrick knew what he was doing with that inversion. I don't think that was any kind of accident.
Maybe not, but I also kind of hope it was. I
Okay.
hope that he was just naturally sort of led to that by his own approach to it, which is in its own way kind of cold and clinical. You read King's book and those emotions are just simmering right there on top of the surface. Like he writes with his emotions on his sleeve, I think, just flowing down his pen. Like you can feel,
Hmm.
probably his own shame and his own anger and all of that stuff coming through Jack when you read that novel.
Hmm.
Whereas when you watch Kubrick's film is very cold. It is very removed. There's something quite clinical about it in a
Oh
way, and
yeah.
and it makes it terrifying, but it also kind of keeps us at an arm's length.
At a distance. That's so poetic, Jinx. I like that. And recently, having seen sort of side by side images of the Stanley Hotel and then the hotel that they used for the film, it really reflects what you're saying. The Stanley Hotel is like kind of intimate and cozy looking and very charming. And then the hotel they used for the film is like very sprawling and I don't know, kind of cold and like block like. So
Yeah, and I
that's
love how
cool.
that's kind of reflected in Mick Garris's miniseries in the
Yeah.
'90s. That was actually the reason that I picked up The Shining in the first place, because I knew that miniseries was coming up. There was this great issue of TV Guide back when TV Guide was the size of a small digest, and it had this amazing Bernie Wrightson painting on the cover of Jack Torrance basically working his way through the snow, the Overlook in the background. He's got an axe in his hands,
I know the
and
one.
yeah, oh god, it's funny. During the pandemic, I actually tracked down another copy on eBay just so I could own it again. But within that TV
Cool.
Guide, they reprinted King's prologue for The Shining called Before the Play, which I'm sure we'll get into at some point down the line here. But yeah, they actually, the prologue was stricken from King's original manuscript. And it was included in this TV guide to sort
Weird.
of lead into the Garris's
The
miniseries that
miniseries.
was due to come out. And they also put out like a miniseries branded copy of The Shining, the book, with sort of artwork from that on the cover. And that was my first copy of the book, and I read it for that. And to your point regarding the hotels, the first time you see the Overlook in the Garrus miniseries, which is actually the Stanley, it's
Mhm.
actually the real place. You look at it, it's just kind of, yeah, it is kind of inviting. It does look kind of charming and quaint in its own way, and it's like I would totally stay there.
Oh,
It
yeah.
doesn't look all that frightening. Whereas in Kubrick's film, the first time you see that hotel, it's just like, nope.
Ugh. Yeah. I'm trying to think of that type of architecture that's, like, brutalist. It's kind of brutal, and I like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure that Kubrick's Overlook could beat up King and Garris's Overlook.
Oh,
You know,
for sure.
on the
But
schoolyard.
I could never imagine the Kubrick one having topiaries. It just wouldn't have made sense, and it
No,
doesn't.
no, no.
So, and he didn't, which I think was probably the right move for 1980, because there was no way they could have done that realistically, or at least in the style with the rest of the film.
Yeah, I mean, even they couldn't really do it in the miniseries either.
It's hard.
And here's
It's
the thing,
hard to make killer topiaries. How are you going to do that?
I love Mick Garris's Shining miniseries. I really
do
do. And
too.
I think it's marvelous. I think Steven Weber is amazing in it. I love
Mhm.
that it really goes back to King's novel. I mean, hell, King wrote it, I believe.
Yeah,
And
he
it felt
did. He wrote the teleplay. There's a part of the book that I always find fascinating compared to the film, maybe because I'm queer. But so in the film, there's a part that is very infamous, which is like the man dressed up as a bear giving the old man ghost a blowjob. In the book, you deal with some similar themes, but it gets deeper into it. There's like the whole section of like a man that dresses up as a dog. And I always find that so interesting and scary. Do you remember this part specifically? Did it have an effect on you?
Yeah, it's one of those things, I don't know that I ever immediately equated it to being any sort of and I'd be very curious to see if King has spoken about this as to what the significance of it, being two men. But
Mhm.
to me, it's just that matter of there's something odd about that moment where one of the participants is in costume,
Yeah.
but also the idea that here's a child who is stumbling upon an act that he doesn't quite understand.
Yes,
And
it's
what's great
yes.
is in the book, I think it's written from Danny's point of view. So even though you, the reader, kind of gets it, like
He can't,
he
right?
doesn't. So,
He
and
knows something's wrong though. Yeah.
yes, yeah. And so that's what, that's why it's always kind of shocking, because it's the second-hand shock of like a child seeing something and being like, "Oh, what is that? What is going on?" Like, not only are they ghosts, and not only is one dressed up in a costume, but also, what the hell are they doing?
Yeah, what's with like this weird sexual dynamic? And I think it's explained in the book that it starts off as like a bit of a parlor trick where everyone finds it very, very funny that he dresses up as a dog. And then it kind of evolves from there, where I believe maybe the character kind of gets off on the humiliation, and then it sort of snowballs into what I don't know. Do you think it also could be sort of like an early representation, not a great one, but of furry fetish?
I didn't want to go there, but
Should I not? We don't
no,
have to.
no, I think it's totally valid.
Okay.
I would be very curious to see what furry culture thinks of this moment.
I am very much would like to know. Yeah. If you're a furry and you're listening, please add us, because I would really like to know where you sit with this.
What if that's like, to furry culture? What if that moment in the movie is kind of like this sacred text to?
Yeah, I'm sure it's not though. Like I have a feeling that they might not love it. Just I don't know. But as a gay person, I'm not like offended by it in any way. I find it very, I don't know, like liminal, salacious, kind of uncanny, but I love it. And I've always loved it. I've always thought like, God damn. Although I'm sure there's something vaguely homophobic about it, because they're going with like, what's the most uncomfortable sort of bizarre thing you could show, and part of that would be two men in a sexual act.
Yeah, if that's the case, I would hope that it at least, and not that this would make it any better in a sense of like the impact that it has, but I
Mhm.
would hope that that wasn't King's intention,
I don't think it was
like consciously.
King's. No, I do think maybe it was Kubrick's. That Kubrick is playing on our, or at least 1980s discomfort with homosexual behavior.
Could be, although I think Kubrick and sex is such a fascinating sort of like
Mm.
area to pursue anyway. When you think about something like Eyes Wide Shut, it's
Oh
like,
yeah, I was gonna be like, what do you mean? Like, but then of course, Eyes Wide Shut. That's the That's the text of Kubrick's and Sex. Yeah, in the book, when you're dealing with that character or that ghost that's dressed up as a dog, he says some crazy shit to Danny. Like, I believe he like threatens to like chew off his genitals, and like it's pretty scary stuff. It's like he's really going for it and that third act of the book where all of the supernatural really starts to unravel.
Yeah, and again, that goes to approach where that's where King goes with that idea, with that moment, with that part in the story, and that potential threat. It's in your face. It's heightened emotion. It's screaming, or it's threatening. It's oh my
Violent.
God.
Yeah.
Whereas in the Kubrick film, they are nowhere near one another. They have no interest in stopping what they're doing, getting up and racing after him. Like,
No, not at all.
in a
Or
way,
I guess
he
it's
is.
Wendy.
Yeah. In a way, he is completely safe in that moment, but it's utterly terrifying at the same time.
Yeah.
Just playing on his reaction and the fact that this is something that should not be in that moment, and that he should not be witnessing it. And so again, I love the dichotomy there. I love that, how King uses that moment in his story to portray terror and how he gets at that terror,
Yep.
whereas Kubrick is more, again, we've already said it, very removed.
Very. Yes, it's true. In the book, it's just way more action packed, and it's against the boy. And in the film, it's not. It's against Wendy, who's not loving what she's seeing. Another part of the book that they delve deeper than either of the films do are the lady in the bathtub. Her backstory is so sad in the book. It really struck me when reading it this year, how she is this wealthy woman that comes to the hotel with a young lover, and she's just like a bit of a drunk. And when the lover, who I think is like maybe even underage or just a lot younger than her, finds another girl and kind of leaves her, I think she commits suicide or dies by alcohol intake or something really bad. And it makes it so much scarier. Meanwhile, she's already one of the most scary characters in cinema history. I love her.
Yeah. It's what was her name? She has a name in the book.
I forget. Do you remember? I could look it up if you want me to.
Is it Laura, Lauren, Lorraine, something like that?
Hold on, let me find. Leah Bedlam. Oh no, that's the actress. Sorry.
I'm sorry. The actress's name is Leah Bedlam.
Is best known for playing the super sexy babe in the bathtub.
That's
in Room 2. Yeah.
That's got to be a stage name.
Yeah, it doesn't sound accurate to me. I do remember her being scary in the McGarris version too.
Yes, and it's Cynthia Garris, right? His wife, who played.
Is that his wife?
Yes. Yeah.
Cool. That's cool.
I just remember one of my earliest Fangorias. It was actually on that, and I believe it was the cover story, and she was actually the centerpiece on the cover. And they talked about because obviously she's beautiful in the film, but then when she turns, and I love that it was the same actress playing both characters, I believe. Or both versions of that character. But I just remember reading in high school, like sitting in the back of like my study hall or whatever, reading how they made that miniseries and noting that the way they made her skin so translucent, they actually had these ridiculously like crazy thin layers, like these thin appliances, and they would glue them in place with KY jelly.
Ew.
And and it's like, so it would give it this weird sort of like
that
layered look. And I just remember explaining to a friend who was into movies like that at the same time. I was just like, yeah, and then he used KY jelly to actually glue the blah 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 blah.
In which version? In
the Garris.
Yeah, okay.
So yeah, I remember that happening and actually explaining it in whatever class we were in, and just a nosy teacher overhearing and just being like, "Why are you talking about KY jelly?"
What? Oh yeah, I mean, and you had a good reason actually. You had one of the few excuses.
Wait! I can explain.
By the way, I have an answer for you. Her name was Lorraine Massey.
Lorraine, okay, cool. And
Mm.
yeah, her backstory is quite different from well, some of the other approaches to, well, for example, I hope we'll get around to it at some point, but talking about unmade projects in the Shining verse, Glenn Mazzara actually wrote a prequel film that Warner Brothers sadly never made called The Overlook Hotel. And part of his version of that story tells a completely different origin story for the woman in the bathtub.
Oh, really? Because I'm on it now, and apparently, and I don't remember this specifically, but in the book, so she was known to seduce young bellboys into having sex in her room, and then eventually does commit suicide by slitting her wrists in the bathtub, which I guess, of course, makes sense. So, what was her backstory in the version you're talking about from the Overlook Hotel?
So, and a little bit of background on that. About a decade or so ago, Warner Brothers was looking at doing a follow up to The Shining, and one of the possible approaches was to do a prequel. And so they opened up pitches, and according to Glenn Mazzara, who ultimately won the job, Glenn Mazzara, by the way, worked on The Walking Dead during some of its earlier seasons. He did Damien, which is a massively
Mm-hmm.
underloved and underappreciated show, which is an extension of the Omen franchise.
Mm-hmm.
He noted that a lot of the pitches went to the Grady twins and doing, the iconography
Yep.
of the two little girls and all of that. And he went back to, again, talking about that Shining prologue before the play. He went back to the very beginning of that story to the man who actually built the Overlook Hotel, and that idea fascinated him. He was like, we always see haunted houses in movies. He was like, I wanted to tell a story about the man who builds the haunted house.
Cool.
And I was like, fuck yes. Why can't this movie exist?
Yeah,
When
that's good.
I was lucky enough to talk to him, I did a piece for Bloody Disgusting for Phantom Limbs about the Overlook Hotel. And so his story concerned Bob T. Watson, who was kind of a robber baron type who carved out a hunk of a mountain with the sole purpose of putting that hotel there and making it like this big shining beacon in the wilderness. And in doing so, we find out when he did it, there was kind of a Donner Party incident that had happened on that land before. And it's just, there's this feeling that the land is cursed. That there is tragedy meant to happen there time and time again, and it will replay itself over and over and over. And so we follow the story of Bob T and his wife and his young sons as they are living in this hotel as it's built up around them. There's this amazing montage, I think, at the end of the first act when the hotel literally builds itself up around them as he's explaining where everything is going to go. And over here is going to be a ballroom, and then you see the ballroom built up in its place, and then so on and so forth. And we get all the way to opening night, and Bob T's poor son, through a horrific accident, winds up dying in a very, very bloody way. He chokes on something, I believe a piece of steak, and this being like the late 1800s, early 1900s, something like that. I don't think the Heimlich maneuver had been created. So there is a doctor there who tries to do a tracheotomy to pull the steak out. And the boy, either possessed or just in, being utterly manic because he's dying, he grabs hold of the knife the moment it pierces his skin and tries to pull it away. And he winds up opening his entire throat in
Oh.
front of his father and mother, and he bleeds out on the table there.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and so it just gets horrible from there, and it feels like, it doesn't hit any of the same beats of The Shining necessarily, but it feels like there's a similar arc there where they start to all go a little bit mad. They're all being played with by the various spirits that roam the Overlook, who existed there before the Overlook was ever built, which I think is such a cool idea. Anyway, by the time you get to the final act, Bob T winds up killing his son and his wife and himself. And at the end, I believe it's revealed that they are, so somebody actually purchases the hotel and renovates it, and they're going to reopen it and basically forget about the tragedy that had befallen the family who lived there before. because the place, it had never quite taken off because of the tragedy with the son. Nobody wanted to stay in this hotel, so it wasn't a matter of the hotel being empty because it was off season. It was empty because nobody wanted to fucking stay in this place.
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of that, with Bob T and his wife and everybody, dying, it's just nobody wanted to touch it. But eventually somebody comes in, they renovate it, they're going to reopen it to the public. And on opening day, when people are bustling about, what's so great is that Bob T is, I think he's like a bellboy, and the wife is like tending the desk, and the son is like doing this. They've been absorbed into the hotel, and now they're a part of it. And we find out that Bob T's wife's sister, she comes back to the hotel to look it over the site, of her family's death, as it were, and she winds up renting a room, and she is drowned in the bathtub.
Oh.
By her sister, with the implication being that one of them will become the woman in the bathtub,
Oh,
which
I
I
love
think
it.
is such a neat sort of lead up to the events of The Shining. Apparently, there was going to be a moment too, where Bob T sits in the bar and he is called over by a gentleman who is sitting there, and we're meant to understand that it was the guy who was the head of the Donner-like party that resorts to cannibalism and murder, amongst themselves, that kind of cursed this land. And Glenn Mazzara basically wrote this big monologue about this guy sitting there talking about the evil of the place and the evil in men, and uh, all of this wonderful. It's a wonderful monologue. I wish that script would leak and get out there, but he wrote it with an eye, with the hopes of it being read by Jack Nicholson. He wanted Nicholson to actually do a
Uh,
cameo. And he was like, so there would be this idea that Jack Torrance, or this guy who was the head of this party before the Overlook was ever there, he is cycling through all of these ages, like over and over and over again. He is cursed to constantly walk that land in different forms, which kind of would explain more about the Kubrick movie in a
mhm.
way, in a marvelous way. But yes, anyway, sorry, I'm taking a long way around here.
I love
Glenn
it.
Mazzara's Overlook Hotel script is fucking marvelous. It would have made an amazing movie. But just at about the time that they were going to get to the point where they were going to pull the trigger on it or not, Stephen King published Doctor Sleep, and then
Mm.
all of a sudden you had a Stephen King penned Shining sequel that you could adapt instead, and so they went with that.
Yeah, that sucks. I mean, it's great that we have Doctor Sleep, but it's kind of sad that that got eradicated from canon because that sounds beautiful.
Oh, it would have been truly amazing, I think. And plus,
Er,
they were
mhm.
looking at, I don't think he was actually going to do it. He said, the thing with the sons, like he was a father, so he didn't want to do a role where he had to watch his son die in front of him and possibly murder his other son. But they had approached Brad Pitt to be the lead. And so you can
Okay.
just imagine if Warner Brothers was willing to put the sort of money into this movie that would have made them feel comfortable approaching somebody like Brad Pitt to star in it. You can
Uh-huh.
only imagine who would ultimately have played that role, like somebody massive, like an A-lister.
Hmm.
I can only imagine something like, could you imagine the Overlook Hotel starring Matthew McConaughey?
I actually think that would work.
I do too. I
I
think it
think
would
that
be
would be
amazing.
good. Yeah, I think that would be really cool. Or, anyone British. Um, yeah, because I was going to ask you, what do you think? What do you think has sort of stained this land? And I guess you answer it from his perspective, which is it was this Donner Party incident that sort of cursed this land. But what do you think it is in the book? Do they ever explain why this hotel is the way that it is?
I don't think there's anything concrete given. I always like the idea of just, the notion of bad land, that
Hmm.
there are just places on Earth that you should not go.
I love that. It's very
Lest it,
Stephen King.
yes, lest it swallow. I mean, 1408. Like
1408.
there's
Pet Cemetery?
Pet Cemetery is a great one too. There are so many places in King's kind of oeuvre. You have the idea of the thinnies, the
Yeah.
spots between worlds where things can leak through. You have stuff like the Mist
I
that
was
talks
just
about
gonna
that.
bring it up. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So And it feels like it's definitely, if you look at it hard enough in King's work, then yeah, there's going to be an explanation there. You kind of get it in a way. But at the same time, I love not knowing. I think it's
Yeah.
scarier not knowing what the fuck is going on there.
Yeah, you see his. Would you agree with me when I say this is where you see some of King's Lovecraft influences,
Oh, 100%.
which he has obviously like often, but he does it. I don't know, with class. You don't see through too much, and I like that.
Yeah, I love that he's sort of, he's it's all the rage now in comic book universes, but I love that King messed around with the idea of multiverses and
Mhm.
multiple. I remember when I was a kid, those big hardcovers came out. It was such a big deal when they came out, but the hardcover releases on the same day. There was a new
Oh
Stephen
yeah,
King
I
novel
know
called
yes.
Desperation and a
Yep.
new Richard Bachman novel called The Regulators.
Yep.
And you could push the hardcovers together and the artwork lined up. Very
Yes.
Sutter Kane,
It's good. Yeah.
And so, but I love that idea that you have two novels featuring the same characters in two entirely different settings and two entirely different stories. And you realize, like, oh, these are different realities.
It's
These are
so
different.
genius. Yeah, I think he called them shadow novels, which I like.
I love that.
Which is, I've never read The Regulators, but I did read Desperation, which is one of the most chaotic Stephen King books I've ever read.
It has one of the most beautiful endings for one of his protagonists. The writer character with the
Yeah.
shotgun shell and the hammer and his final like hurrah. And they do it in the movie, and I like the movie. I really do. And
I do
think
too.
Ron
Another
Perlman,
McGarris joint.
exactly, yeah. And I think Garris really, really did a great job with bringing that to the screen. Ron Perlman is
Perfect
just
casting. It's
oh
like
my God.
absurdly perfect casting.
But yeah, I do love that idea in King's work, though, that you have characters that repeat. And recently, and I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit about this show later, but when we had Castle Rock,
Yeah, we are going to get, but yes.
was it Bill Skarsgård?
Is that the younger one? No.
I think so. He is of the Skarsgård clan, who is apparently going to be the Crow coming up, and I'm very curious. He's a marvelous actor, and I'm sure he's going to do a great job. But
I think so too.
Don't need a Crow remake anyway.
I don't know. Well, we don't.
The Crow is sacred to me, so I get a little. But at the same time, like if you're just going to go back to O'Bara's graphic novel and adapt it, maybe.
But I mean, it's not called Crow, so they're not doing that.
Yeah, I know. So it'll be curious. But anyway, Bill Skarsgård in Castle Rock plays a character called the Kid, who is basically found underneath the Shawshank prison. And you eventually get into a story that involves multiple universes, and you find out that this kid is pretty malevolent, and he might even be the Man in Black. He might even be, Randall Flagg, like that guy in King's fiction who is the ultimate bad guy, right? Which I thought was so neat considering. And there's even this thing in Castle Rock where the kid had not been seen in over 2.5 decades, just over 2.5 decades, like say 27 years or so.
I knew, yeah.
And they cast Bill Skarsgård in the role after Bill Skarsgård had just played Pennywise the Clown in Andy Muschietti's, big,
of course,
two It films. So I thought that was kind of interesting. It's like, okay, so I don't know what they're doing here.
What does that mean? It's so, and then of course we're never going to get any more. I feel like that's rotten and kind of trollish, but it is genius.
But then Stephen King just a week ago on Twitter asked everyone if they thought that the Man in Black, that Randall Flagg, and I forget how he set it up, but he was like, people are asking if
it was Screen Rant, I think he was talking to, yeah.
Okay, where he said something like,
who's the scariest villain or best villain or
Randall Flagg or Pennywise the Clown, and he was like, and why don't they ask if they're one and the same?
Right.
And if they are one and the same, then you had another Skarsgård playing Randall Flagg in the recent Stan
Oh wow!
miniseries.
Oh, I'm down getting a headache.
You have Bill Skarsgård playing the kid who is essentially like, the Man in Black, or Randall Flagg, who also played Pennywise in another film. I feel like I'm Charlie Day with like all of the diagrams behind me and the
Yeah.
strings connecting everything.
Yep. Yep. That's
But it feels right.
well. But, I mean, they're making us do this. They're yeah. You're not gonna get this, I don't think. But it's very like Taylor Swift and her fans. Leaving us these little breadcrumbs. I am not a Swift fan. I'm going to delete that. Yeah, now
But
I
I
have
will
a
say
headache.
about Castle Rock, and I know we're going to get there, but maybe I should hold off. But I will say that there is a marvelous Shining sequel tease buried in Castle Rock that we should probably mention at some point.
Oh, interesting. I have not watched Castle Rock, so I would want to know more about that. But we're going to get there pretty soon. I think before we do, I kind of want to wrap up on The Shining, the original film, because I think while I wanted to go sort of deeper into it, I do think we've tackled a lot about it. I guess my question for you is, because I think this is sort of always out there, is film versus book. Where do you land? Like, do you have a preference, or do you see them sort of as two different things? How do you compare the two?
I think I think the novel is a perfect novel. I think the movie is a perfect film.
Mm-hmm.
I think the film is a terrible
Adaptation?
adaptation
Yeah.
and a masterpiece of a film. I think that the book has way more heart and it feels way more satisfying in its own way.
It's more emotional.
Way more emotional.
Yeah.
And I feel like, and it definitely has something to say, like, at its heart. Whereas with Kubrick's film just works purely, and I'm not saying that Kubrick's film says nothing. Like, fuck, they made a documentary about what it could possibly mean.
And the answer was nothing.
Yeah, exactly. But with Kubrick's film, I think it's just so marvelously made and so fucking frightening, and it's just a masterclass in suspense, and I
It's
adore it.
it's really scary. He has this quote about making it that I read earlier today that gave me the chills, and I want to share it with you guys here. So, speaking on the theme in the movie, this is what Kubrick had to say. There's something inherently wrong with the human personality. There's an evil side to it. One of the things that horror stories can do is show us the archetypes of the unconscious. We see the dark side without having to confront it directly. And I think that's exactly what he did with this movie. It's like peering into the abyss of human darkness, but we don't know what it means. So it's kind of like being that little boy in the hallway seeing the furry ghost and knowing that something is terribly wrong, but not really having the ability to put your finger on why or what, just knowing that something is off. And I think that's what the movie feels like to me.
Yeah, and I get that. I too wonder, like, if maybe, in a strange way, like, you watch the first half of The Shining and you wonder if Kubrick is even remotely interested in the supernatural at all, and if he's maybe just more interested in making the ghosts and the demons, uh, just simply representations of Jack's own demons that he's battling with. And certainly in both tellings of the story, book and movie, that's the case. But it feels like maybe Kubrick was almost a little embarrassed at the more genre leaning stuff in the movie. But then, you get to the final act and he leans full bore into it. And it's like, well, no, that's not really the case at all. But
I wonder.
I
Yeah.
am reminded of that. There's this great story that Stephen King tells where it was the middle of the night and he's woken up by a phone call, and it was Stanley Kubrick on the other end. This was during the development of the film, and Kubrick, just out of the blue, he asked him. He was like, "Do you believe in God?"
Well,
And King said, "Yes, I do." And Kubrick just said, "I don't," and hung up. And it's like, you can kind of see that in each
yes.
telling of that story.
Big time. It kind of does feel why these two stories are at odds with one another. They're completely inverted, but that's why it works so nicely. I love that story.
Yeah, it's
Mhm.
great. If only it could have been recorded.
Yeah, I don't think they ended up being such good friends at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Stephen King's a bitter Betty about it.
He
Just
is,
so bitter Betty.
and I get it, like, in a way, hopefully, and I think I'd read this somewhere, that Mike Flanagan's Dr. Sleep, in trying to reconcile the Kubrick film with the King novel and, sort of synthesize them, uh, before, or actually while he was making Dr. Sleep, into one vision, that it actually sort of made King feel a little better about the
Yep,
Kubrick film. So, and I
I've heard
love
that.
that.
I hope that it's true, because King deserves to feel better because it's his baby. But yeah, I mean, it's a brilliant, as you said, terrible adaptation, perfect film.
Agreed.
I think now that you've led us down into Doctor Sleep Boulevard, I wouldn't mind talking a little bit about it before we head into the land of HBO's Overlook series. Yeah, so Doctor Sleep is this 2013 follow-up to The Shining, where you see Danny Torrance as an adult sort of coping with his trauma of having survived the initial, I don't know, actions in The Shining, and now he eventually is led back to the Overlook and also has to sort of battle with this group of psychics called the True Knot, who are out there trying to kill kids because it gives them extended life. And it's kind of like I don't know, a mixed bag of different storylines. Have you read Doctor Sleep the book?
I have to admit, I have not read the book. I wanted to when it first came out, and for whatever reason, I put it off. And I haven't found my way to it. And I guess I always wanted to revisit The Shining before I did that, and I haven't read that book in a while. I kind of want to read them back to back. If that was ever going to happen, anytime soon, I'm sure it would have happened right before the film came out. And I was so busy I didn't get around to it, and I feel like a bad King fan is what I'm saying.
No, you're a good King fan because between the two of us, I believe you're the one that sort of has more love in your heart for the film adaptation. But I think that has something to do with the different versions that we've encountered. Is this correct? So you're a fan of the director's cut of Doctor Sleep? Is this true?
So I will say, leading up to the film adaptation that Mike Flanagan did a few years ago, I don't know if you remember, but they remastered the first film, the Kubrick film, in 4K. And before they plunked it down onto disc, they released it in theaters for like a one night Fathom Events showing or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to go see it on the big screen. I already loved the movie, but let me tell you, like, watching that on a large screen, it's a completely different experience. It's marvelous.
Yes.
And so there was that. And then I think at the very end of it, there was this great little featurette with Flanagan and King talking about Dr. Sleep. This was around the same time that the second trailer for the film had come out, which the second trailer for Dr. Sleep was like one of the best movies that came out that year. So I could not have been more pumped to see Dr. Sleep. And I get to the theater. It's like, it's not even opening night. It's like premiere night. It's like the Thursday 7 or 8 o'clock showing, right? And I'm grinning ear to ear. I can't wait to watch it. And cut to like 2 hours and 30 minutes later. And I walk out and I was just kind of like, oh, it was good. It was fine, I guess. I was, but Ewan McGregor was good, and the performances were good, and I have a crush on Rebecca Ferguson and her little hat, and
Yeah.
that's about it. That's it was fine. It was
That's 3
perfectly
stars.
fine. And being a completist, of course, I picked up the 4K when it came out, only to find that it had the director's cut on it, which was 30 minutes longer. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to give it another shot. I'm going to watch Flanagan's cut. The man hasn't let me down yet, except the theatrical version. I love all of his previous stuff. I love Absentia. I love Oculus. I adore Before I Wake. The Haunting of Hill House, even though I hadn't seen it at that point, is brilliant. So I pop in his director's cut, and 20 minutes in, like, you just feel that it's a better version of the film. It moves better. It feels like it has weight. Like it's broken up into on-screen chapters,
Nice.
which actually, if I'm getting this correct, actually uses the chapter titles from King's book.
Cool.
It's 30 minutes longer, and yet it feels like it moves better than the chopped up version. The characters' arcs are better. There's more heart. It's just everything about it on every conceivable level just works better. And so this movie, and I've seen the director's cut a few times now. So this film, in its theatrical cut, went from a movie that I thought was, fine, to being a fucking masterpiece. I think it's Flanagan's best work. And I love The Haunting of Hill House. I love Midnight Mass. I think Doctor Sleep is his masterpiece. I think it stands alongside Kubrick's movie pretty damned well. And I cannot say enough good things about it. I adore it. So, Josh, I know you have some hard feelings towards it based on its theatrical, version, and I get that.
Mm-hmm.
All I'm saying is that I think the director's cut will make you a fan. I really do.
Can we make a deal? And here's my deal. I will 100% watch it and report back if you promise to watch Bly Manor and report back.
Okay, fair. I will.
Because I would have to say, and I've said it before, that is my favorite Flanagan project, personally.
That is that's my Flanagan blind spot. And I think I was kind of put off by, look, I know he was involved with it. He developed it. The other directors, I believe Axel Carolyn directed episodes, and I love her. And it has a lot of great people involved. So I'm certain it's great. It was just one of those things where he directed every episode of the first season, and so we all talked about, hey, isn't it great when directors do that? Like Cary Fukunaga, who did all 8 episodes of the first season of True Detective. It's great when a filmmaker directs every episode because it feels like a more singular, cohesive vision. And then you get to Bly Manor, and it's just kind of like, okay, yeah, he started it off, and then other directors picked it up, and I was just kind of like, oh, so it's like every other season of television. Okay, cool,
Mm-hmm.
And here's the thing, that's a silly reason to not watch it. It really is, and I understand that. I'm just saying that's what's kind of
we both have our baggage, okay? And we're both gonna put our baggage down, and we're going to watch them. And we're both going to report back. But yeah, I'm very interested on revisiting the director's cut of Dr. Sleep. Everything that you're saying to me does make sense because I trust Flanagan so much based on everything I've seen. And it does kind of feel a little disjointed, the theatrical version, which is already long enough, by the way. But
well, it feels like a flat tire. It really does. It feels like it doesn't operate the way it should. It's kind of airless. It just... it's just kind of blah, whereas you watch the version that he intended and it's like, oh, right, that's why he's a master. He
already a master.
Stop fucking with this stuff, Warner Brothers. Yeah, okay, I'm sorry, you're gonna have to lose that 5th showing of the day in every movie theater, but you know what? At least the movie you're going to be showing is a movie that people are going to want to come back and revisit time and time again, and that they're certain to pick up on physical media or stream again down the road. Instead, you hack a half hour out of it, and it sucks as a result.
Listen, this is the era of TikTok, okay? This is not the era of 3-hour epics.
And yet, every Marvel movie is 3 hours long.
You're right.
And they make $1 billion.
You're so fucking right. I'm gonna have to check this out. I am fascinated. Dr. Sleep. And also, even the theatrical version, some really scary stuff in it. The Lorraine Massey, Lady in the Bathtub stuff, chilling. So scary. And
just the idea that she
terrifying.
Follows him. It's bad enough that he had to deal with her in the hotel, but then there's no escape from Bathtub Lady. Come
on. And then ultimately Bathtub Lady's own fate is terrifying. Getting trapped inside of a little box for all of eternity. Yuck.
Well, you know what? Don't scare kids, Bathtub Lady.
Yeah, Bathtub Lady. Get it together, Bathtub Lady. And the death of the poor kid from Room. It was horrifying. Is that worse than the theatrical in the director's cut? I forget his name.
I've only ever seen the theatrical cut once. I feel like it was in the director's cut a little rougher. Like it feels
It's
like it
rough
goes on
already.
forever.
It does feel it in the theatrical one. It felt like it went on forever, which honestly, ballsy. Killing kids in Hollywood is already a ballsy move, but then the way that they did it in Doctor Sleep is just brutal.
Yeah, I mean they make you feel it in that scene, and that's and that's what makes the True Knot so terrifying. Is that what I love about those characters is that they feel like family. They love one another. They look out for one another. They're funny and they're charming and they're charismatic and they're kind to one another. And it's kind of like the this is a weird parallel to draw, but you think of something like the Fireflies in the Rob Zombie movies. When it's just them, they seem cool.
Yeah.
But it's just that they have no regard for anybody else.
Especially not kids who are psychics.
Exactly. And so when she there's that ice cold moment where the kid is pinned down to the ground and he says something like, "Are you going to hurt me?" And she just gets right in his face and she's like, "Yes." It's just
it's so scary, and she's so good. There was on Twitter a really funny behind the scenes image of her and the kid. He's just making a funny face. I love her, and I'm glad to see her really getting her due post Dune.
Yeah, she's brilliant. I love Rebecca Ferguson. I love her character in the Mission Impossible movies. Like, she brings a lot of class to those films.
Well, I have not seen them, but I will take your word on it.
Worth watching for her alone.
That's enough of a sell for me. And on that note, how would you feel if we head into the Overlook series itself?
We should, after we mention one thing.
Yes. Tell me.
So since we're talking about Flanagan and we're talking about The Shining and we're talking about unmade projects, one of my white whales for Phantom Limbs, for listeners out there who don't know, I write a column series for Bloody Disgusting concerning unmade horror movie sequels and remakes that were developed but sadly never came to be. One of my white whales is to chat with Mike Flanagan about his Shining prequel, Halloran. That was all going to be about Dick Halloran before the events of The Shining. And I don't know much about it. I don't know what the hell it was going to be. I just know it was something he was looking at. And man, I wish we had gotten it, because Flanagan rules. And I'm certain that him playing in that sandbox again would yield something else marvelous. But sadly, there's very, very little information out there.
I'm almost glad it didn't happen, just so we can get a Phantom Limbs on it one of these days. Almost worth it. And not to give too much away, but Flanagan will come up again in this episode before the time is up. So we'll see how that plays out. But yeah, as we've promised this entire time, there was going to be an HBO Max limited series based on the Overlook Hotel from The Shining. So all the way back in 2019, J.J. Abrams and his production company Bad Robot Productions signed a massive, ginormous deal with Warner Media. I think it was worth somewhere around $250 million. And reportedly, he was going to produce original series and films for Warner for their various divisions. And this would have included HBO and, of course, Warner Brothers Pictures. One of the original titles announced for this deal was going to be a series simply titled Overlook. And it was going to be a series going back to this iconic location from the Shining film and book. So Overlook marked I think it was going to be the fourth collaboration for Bad Robot that was going to be in the King universe. I believe they'd already done the horror series Castle Rock, which we've talked about today. There was the Hulu limited series 11/22/63, based on a really incredible later career book by Stephen King. And then I think most recently was the Apple TV or Apple TV Plus show Lisey's Story, based on one of probably the most personal novels by Stephen King, and maybe even his favorite, if I'm not mistaken. And then, of course, we were going to get this Overlook series. So J.J. Abrams and Stephen King were really in bed together in terms of making TV shows in the late 2010s. This show was reportedly going to be 10 episodes, a 10-episode series directed by, Abrams and company. Castle Rock co-creator and executive producer Dustin Thomason, as well as co-executive producer Scott Brown, were going to potentially write the Overlook series. I've heard people compare what was going to happen with Overlook to what A&E did with the Bates Motel prequel series, sort of how they approached Psycho based on this iconic Psycho location with the Bates Motel. So, according to Variety Online, Overlook, the prequel series, was going to explore untold and terrifying stories of the most famous haunted hotel in American fiction, which I think is true. But it remains to see what or if any of the original ghosts mentioned in Stephen King's novel, as we were talking about, like Lorraine Massey, any of them, the twins, were they going to be explored, or were we going to see completely new stories? It was never actually reported. Unfortunately, this is not a series that has yet to come to fruition. So by August of the same year, it didn't take too long, HBO Max executives, who apparently liked the project, did state that they felt like it wasn't appropriate for their current slate and decided not to move forward at Warner Brothers. It's reported that the television series is still being shopped around to other networks. A rumor is that it could land at Netflix, which is an interesting location for a Stephen King property, considering how in bed they are with Mike Flanagan, leading fans to speculate wildly that if Netflix did land the Overlook series, could Flanagan end up directing or show running? What do you think? Do you think if it landed at Netflix, there's a chance that Flanagan would hop on the project?
I have no idea. I would think if Flanagan were going to do something again in that realm, he would probably want to. And this is pure assumption, right? I would have to imagine he would want to build it from the ground up. He seems like a storyteller that is more keen to do that than be a gun for hire. If
Especially
so
now.
because Overlook, it sounds like if they're shopping it around, it's got to be more than just a title. I would imagine not. Who knows? But you never know. Like I think that would be great because I would love to see it can be read as a direct sequel to that film, even though he had to recast a lot of the roles. Even when he did recast, he used the same costumes. Obviously,
Some very similar looking actors.
similar look. I mean, if he wanted to look past what Kubrick had done and hew closer to simply hew closer to King's work, he wouldn't have cast Alex Esso as Wendy, who is the Wendy of the film is not the Wendy of the novel. They're quite different, both of them.
Yeah, one's blonde and one's not.
Yeah, and even personality-wise too. Like I feel like Rebecca De Mornay and the McGarris
Is way closer.
Yes, yeah. And so, but he didn't go that route. He chose Alex Esso, and she looks quite a lot like Shelley Duvall once she's made up.
It's scary,
but her performance and her voice were insanely accurate to do that. So I really appreciated the fact that he did his own thing, but he kept the Kubrick film canon. And if there's going to be more Shining verse related stuff, I kind of hope they do that same thing. I hope that we keep all of that as canon.
I do too.
So and that's what hurts about like Glenn Mazzara's The Overlook Hotel would have been such a marvelous big screen, big budget, prestige horror film. And I would hope they would have done the same thing. There's a moment in it where Mazzara actually wrote the famous photograph being taken with everybody in it. You see Jack in at the very end of the
Of
first
course.
film, right? 1921. How the fuck is he there, right? And so in Mazzara's script, he writes that moment where that photo is taken, but there is like a ladder in the way, like standing in front of, so like you wouldn't be able to see the person standing in Jack's place, so you could keep the movie canon still. You could wonder, like, okay, right behind that ladder, that's where Jack is standing, like toasting, right? And you could only imagine, could you imagine sitting in a theater and, a packed house and a couple of hundred people all at once trying to crane their heads around the ladder to see behind it, not being able to. I love that idea.
It's scary.
But yeah, anyway, I'm taking the long way around of just saying whatever they do to follow up The Shining, I hope they follow Flanagan's model and they stay true to what's come before.
You know what would be cool? In line with the first 2 seasons of The Haunting of Hill House, how they're going, or of the Haunting series,
Oh,
how they take
wow.
classic works of
Josh,
literature.
no.
Yeah, if they do The Haunting of the Overlook Hotel.
Somebody cut you a check. Just, my God, yes.
Because it's totally in line with taking a classic piece of Gothic literature, just a little bit more modern, and adapting it into the series. And it would work so well.
Somebody needs to work up that artwork of like,
A pitch deck?
Yeah, well, there's the the Haunting of Hill House. I think they did it with Bly Manor too, but you have the house itself, right, sitting in frame, and the lit up windows essentially acting as eyes, because the bottom half of the image is somebody's face, right?
Uh-huh.
Somebody needs to do that. Make that artwork with the Overlook Hotel, with the not the Stanley, but the one from the film, the Kubrick film, and yeah, put the lower half of like somebody's face underneath, and just do the graphic. Call it The Haunting of the Overlook Hotel. Tag Flanagan and Netflix both. Maybe Bad Robot if they have a Twitter account. Just, we need to make this happen. I've never wanted anything more. So, yes.
I really appreciate that. And I feel like I'm part of this journey, and I really hope I do get a paycheck. And can we bring back Victoria, how do you say her name? Pedretti, who's in the first 2 seasons? She's so good.
She can be in anything she wants to be.
Yeah, she's so fucking good. So yeah. So yeah, Flanagan, I know you listen, Flanagan. You've told me. You're sitting here with me. You're my roommate.
Wait, what?
Yeah, he's my roommate, and I listen. He's my best friend.
Okay, are you?
I know he does not listen to this podcast. I mean, not to my knowledge. I mean, who knows?
Maybe he does, and we just don't know. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Mike.
Just want to say hey.
He needs The Haunting of the Overlook Hotel. It's a mouthful. It needs to happen. Netflix, please.
And you know what? If you do that, then if you do an entire season, if you do like 10 or 12 hours, then you know what? Go ahead and do Glenn Mazzara's script as a couple of episodes.
Yeah,
do
easy.
Your Halloran prequel over the course of 2 episodes.
Yeah, it could all happen in 10 episodes.
Yes, we need to make this happen. Who do we need to yell at?
Flan, the Flan man, the Flan Stan. That's us.
Okay, well, he's not going to listen to this anymore.
And I think Jack will show up at some point. Just get him in there. I don't know how.
He's long since retired. I don't think.
Has he?
Jack Nicholson? Yeah, he's been retired for a decade, I think. So
okay. Well, there's always the exception to the rule, now isn't there? But this probably isn't it. But yeah. Jinx, do you think we're ever going to get to see an Overlook series or film? Do you think it's ever going to happen?
Maybe. I'm certain that we haven't seen the last of this franchise. I know that Dr. Sleep definitely underperformed, and that's sad, but you know what? Release a director's cut next time, Warner Brothers, you pricks.
Yeah, it's your fault, buddy.
That movie would have had legs had it been the masterpiece it is in his director's cut. It would have stayed in theaters, damn it. Anyway, will we see an Overlook series? I don't know. Maybe we'll see a movie. Maybe we'll see a series. But I feel like we're not done with the Shining world yet.
And is that what you would want as a fan? Would you want to see it continued?
Absolutely.
Or do you think... Yeah, me too.
And I will say, whether that's Flanagan, whether that's Bad Robot. I mean, Bad Robot did a marvelous job with Castle Rock, which is such a weird series in that
Mm-hmm.
it's very faithful to King's characters and his world, but it told completely new stories that he himself did not write. So it's kind of like, in a way, it's like fan fiction, but
Totally.
at the same time, like, how cool is that we have a television series, even just 2 seasons of it, but a television series based on an author's works that he didn't actually pen himself while said author is still alive. Like, that's just mad to me.
It's
And
a
I
little
love it.
mind-bending, but it's very cool. And it's kind of sad that we didn't get to see that go for a million seasons and do a million different things.
We did, because the first season played around with King's iconography quite a lot in really fascinating ways. The second season, I think, was a big improvement. Not the first
Oh.
season was bad; it was great. The second season, touched on Annie Wilkes from Misery, and Lizzie Kaplan was absolutely amazing as that character. And it also played around with Jerusalem's Lot, but not in the way you would expect. Not with vampires. What it does instead is kind of marvelous. But I will say, in the first season, there's a character played by Jane Levy, Mia, from the Evil Dead remake, or, well, it's not a remake, whatever it is, Evil Dead from 2013 or so. And her character is named Jackie Torrance.
Oh.
And Jackie is a nickname because everyone knows her crazy Uncle Jack.
Oh.
And so there is a setup at the end of the first season that she is actually going to take a road trip and check out rather the Overlook Hotel. And it's like, oh, I really want to see that season. Like, I want to see her character get mixed up. Like, I want to see that sequel. And
Yeah.
so I
Yeah.
wonder if, given that was Bad Robot, even though it wouldn't have been Hulu, they were shopping around at HBO Max. I don't know what the rights situation would be there, but I wonder if Bad Robot would have been able to take the character that originated in their series that aired on another channel, another streamer, and just pulled them into their Overlook series. I would love that. I would love to think that they could have done that.
I think so. They could have done anything. That's what's so brilliant about it. It's too bad. And it sounds like, with the way that you're explaining they handled different Stephen King properties in Overlook, they would have done it, but it would have been something like completely in a way that I would never have guessed. Like, and maybe not with ghosts. Maybe it would have been like a totally different way in, which could be cool too.
Yeah, who knows what they would have done. Maybe, I know there's very little information out there. Maybe they would have gone back to Before the Play, the Stephen King prologue, which took place in various time periods. Maybe they would have done the Grady twins. Maybe it would have been a sequel. Who knows? Like, it's what I love about it is that King's writing is so rich, and the worlds that he creates are so dense that you feel like you could walk around them and live in them. And I think that's probably why we have stuff like Castle Rock, why we would have had something like Overlook. You as a reader feel like you can hop into his worlds and just walk around. So why shouldn't other creatives feel like they could get in there and create their own stories within the worlds that he has sort of laid out? And for that reason alone, I wish we would have gotten Overlook.
Mm-hmm. We deserve it. So, with that said, you and I officially have greenlit it, so people get to work. Jinx, if you were hypothetically to escape the dungeon, where could people find you on the internet?
So you can find me on Twitter. It's at Jinx1981. That's JINX1981. You can find me on Instagram, posting weird, fucked up shots of random things that I find here and there. Heavily filtered. It's
Cool.
Jinx740941. Otherwise, you can find my writings on Bloody Disgusting. Check out Phantom Limbs there. And otherwise, somebody, please, God, send help. How long has it been?
You love it. Get into it. Thank you so much for listening to Development Hell. If you enjoy this podcast, then please do us a major favor of leaving us 5 stars and writing a positive review. It really makes all the difference in the world. We'll see you next week with a brand new episode of Development Hell.
Thank you for listening to the Dread Podcast Network.